this is the second in a series that we're doing where we're going to be using Eleventy to build up a Jamstack app, which will be an RSS reader. So on Tuesday, we initialized kind of our feature list. So we kind of just talked through what is involved in making an RSS reader app. And one thing with Eleventy is that it allows us to really easily source data and be able to manipulate that data and, you know, however we need to be able to display it and do things like categorize it or just all kinds of stuff. So that's why I've chosen Eleventy. It's also just kind of my build tool of choice. And if you are unfamiliar with it, it is a static site generator. I'm going to paste in my link here. If you're totally unfamiliar, you know, we're definitely going to start from zero today. And so you'll get to know some of the initial steps involved. But we are creating kind of a medium complexity application. So some of the stuff we're going to do today is not necessarily required if what you're looking for is maybe like a blog environment or just a less featured site. So I do have various resources. In the post archive, you can find a written version of a beginner's tutorial. There's a 3-minute video, which will essentially be doing these steps today. And then a course over on Egghead that is a pro course if you would like to do that as well. So you can see I've done a few kind of interesting things with Eleventy. Another kind of goal of this stream is to say, like, you don't necessarily need to output a static application just because you're using a static site generator, right? So these are just a few other things I've made that you may not typically think of as like what you would output with a static site generator. So one thing I tried to explain in the first stream as well is that we're also viewing this application a little bit differently in that we're not trying to like build a service for other people to use. So we're not trying to build a UI necessarily for like adding feeds. We're doing that sort of thing with configuration of the Eleventy site. So the end goal is that this will be an Eleventy starter that you would be able to use for your own purpose. So you have full control through configuration of what feeds are involved, things like categories, sorting, all these things would be configuration rather than something you would, you know, host up at a website and then try to manage through a UI that way. So a little bit maybe shift of how you might think about this. Is essentially an app for our own personal use, not for others to consume and use as a web app. Hopefully that makes sense. It'll probably make more sense as we keep going with it. All right, so we explored last week like some ideas of like what is even involved in an RSS item. And then we explored like what are the other kind of features or types of information we'd like to display. And we had to do a little bit of search on like, of course, what is available in RSS feed. A cool thing about Eleventy too is that, for example, if the feed didn't return an image or something, we could just add on an additional fetch to go get that from the site, theoretically. I don't know how to do it off the top of my head right now, but theoretically we could do something like that. And then we kind of started to think through like, what are we actually going to show here? And this is where it's going to get a little bit more complex. We probably won't get to this part of the feature set today. Today, we're going to really focus on the general app architecture. So getting some layouts and templates set up, not styling them, but just getting them prepared. We're going to start to experiment with adding in. I found a node package that I think is going to be a good one to get us started on fetching feeds. And we'll see how that works. We'll see how far that we get with that. We'll probably start simple and then in the next stream make it a little more manageable in how we feed in that content, and that means adding a little more complexity. I have not even like opened a project locally or anything, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from a project I have out here, my Eleventy SaaS skeleton. Like I said, we're not going to get actually started with styling today, but it's going to give me some of the build process stuff that I would like to use. So we'll say use this template. So you have two options here if you were going to use this. You can say use this template, which creates a new repo, which is my preference. But you can also fork it. It's just kind of a different purpose if you fork it. So use this template as like you're going to pick it up and have this new repo with all the stuff from that starter. But you don't have to, it won't be attached to the original repo like a fork would be. Okay, so what are we going to call this? We'll call it Eleventy RSS reader. Probably makes the most sense. We'll go ahead and make it public since obviously everything we're doing is public. It's going to create that, and you can see like it says generated from. So that's what happens when you do that template feature. And of course it's copied in everything we had before. So I'm just going to quickly get it copied locally. I'm going to do this off screen, but I use the app fork as my, I'm a big fan of using GUIs for these kind of things. I rarely use Git in the terminal just for very light touch things. All right, so let's just kind of explore what this starter gave us. It's not very much. The main thing that this starter is giving us, the whole point of it, is to offer the various steps that we need for processing SAS. And so that's all this stuff. If we were doing a much simpler project, actually, if I go over here, we'll go down to my beginner article. If we were doing a much simpler project, we would just essentially set up a start and a build command. Now, what the start command is going to offer for us is a local server, and that is going to come with browser sync. So that means we get the benefits of when we make a change, it's watching for those, and it's going to automatically reload the server. So we don't have to do anything extra. When you initially do a low complexity Eleventy site, which is most of the sites that I've done as well, you're really just installing Eleventy. So since we've got this starter, it's already done that step. The rest of this stuff is strictly to do with the SAS, the SAS build that we have. So that requires way more than our actual Eleventy setup itself. So the other thing that we have here is just one preference, which is to customize the input and output directory. So you can see we have our source directory. We haven't built this yet. And in fact, that reminds me, since I just created this project, I better have it do the install. And then again, for our SAS, we're just informing Eleventy that this SAS directory is something that should be watched to make sure when we make changes in SAS, it's reflected on the local server. Cool. So we've installed our dependencies. We're not going to do anything else here for now. And then in our source directory, we've just got just the bare minimum so far. We've created an index file, which without that, nothing would show up. And then it's attached to what's Eleventy calls a layout. So those are contained in the directory of includes. And kind of a convention is to call your kind of primary base layout that has like your HTML boilerplate in it. Just go ahead and call that base. And it can be any of the allowed templating languages. So that's an important thing. To know about Eleventy is that there's 10 different templating languages that you can use. This NJK, that's Nunjux. And so that's a templating language. That's where these like double curly syntax is coming from. But let me move this out of the way. So in our base template, our base layout, it's going to look for, what this is doing is it's looking for the front matter variable of title. So you can see we've supplied that here. And then the other thing that it's doing is anything outside of the front matter is going to be fed in through this content variable. And we're piping that through the filter of safe, because without that, the HTML that would be coming out of here would be escaped. So it wouldn't actually render as HTML. It would be like visible as, it would appear like text of the HTML tags on the page. So those are your, regardless of what kind of Eleventy app you're building, the steps I just described are going to be steps you'll probably go through. I started this one with a Nunjux file, and it depends what I'm doing with it. Kind of at will, you can change this to whatever other templating extension, for example, Markdown. And let's go ahead and get this started building. So I'm going to do npm start, which we customize that command to be the one that launches Eleventy with the browser sync server. So you can see very quick, and it's giving you, browser sync's letting you know where you can find this locally. And of course, the other benefit of browser sync is that you can actually view this externally when you have this running. So for example, if you want to review it on your real mobile devices, when you have this running on your local network and you're hooked into the same Wi-Fi and all that good stuff, you would be able to view this on a mobile device local to you, which is pretty handy. At this point, well, we'll leave it open so we can see any processing for the first couple steps here. But you'll notice that it's not configured out of the box to launch your browser. So we'll still go over here and kind of manually have to open that up. So anyway, it's loaded up our index file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this share screen so that we can watch it a little bit easier. So I changed it to Markdown. So at this point, I can say, hello, Twitch. And as soon as I save that, it's going to rebuild and you see it. I didn't even have to refresh. It's auto loading. So there you go. With those steps, you would have, we've got an Eleventy site up and running. And we have kind of our essential features of being able to create pages and throwing it into a layout. And this will get us started. This gets us what we need to begin this particular project. All right, so this is the part where I've essentially reached where I'm like familiar and comfortable with in terms of the project we are building. At this point, we have some decisions to make on kind of how we want to architect this. What I'm thinking is today we will create our data source and we'll do it kind of at low complexity. And then probably not today, but on our next stream, we'll bump up the complexity and start actually like working through how that content appears in our site. So our feed content, the RSS feed content. What I already did, the one thing I did outside of this stream time was look up a node package that I think meets our needs. There was a couple that came up. I'm going to select feedparser because it talks about being able to kind of read in. Last stream we were kind of like, we're not quite sure whether RSS or Atom is kind of the definitive feed source. I did some more poking around and that's a weirdly hard answer to find. So anyway, this seems to handle both and kind of does some, it kind of does some of the work of like giving us common properties to use. So we won't have to like check if one exists and if not, use a different one type of a thing, which sounds like a good thing that we want to have happen. Let me zoom this up a little bit. So with that said, we're going to need to install this. I have not done that yet since, of course, we just launched a new project. So I'm going to temporarily kill our build process here. So one of the expected directories for Eleventy is the underscore data directory. And so anything that we put in here, if we format it as JSON or if we do like use node and do like export it as a module or a few different ways we can do this. But that will be considered data. So if we format it ultimately as a JSON object, which we're going to, then that is available within any templates and layouts in our Eleventy site. So at that point, we can pick that up. It will act like it's local data because this fetch that we're going to do for these feeds is only going to be done at build time. So after that point, we can use that data anywhere in our site. And so probably the one thing we're going to have to see here is, we obviously want to be conscious of how long that build process is going to take. And when we do have this when we're in development mode, that fetch is going to actually happen by default every single time we make a change and save. So there are ways to cache that, and we'll probably explore that. I haven't had to do that on my other sites, but this is probably the good time to explore that feature. Okay, so I'm going to create the data directory. And for now, well, we could just name it the same, right? We could just name it feedparser. Well, actually, okay, so the file name here does matter because this is going to be how you access any data that gets returned out of this file. So maybe we'll call it feeds instead, because that's ultimately what's going to come out is a JSON object with the detail of each of our feeds and the child feed items, all of that. At least as our starting point. We might try to separate that a little bit or something in our next stream. Okay, anyway. All right, so we're going to I'm just copied this from their example. But okay, so I'm not a Node expert. I'm not a JavaScript expert. I kind of copy paste and modify when I have to do stuff with this. So if I do something wrong, I'm very open to being told that there's a better way to do it. So if you see me do something that, just let me know if there's a better way or you have resources. So I think I need to do it this way. I think I need this inside of my export though, in terms of how Eleventy wants to pick it up. Okay, so the first feed that I'm going to throw at it. So when we're going to seek out feeds, for now, we will supply the feed URL manually. So you can see that. So if you're looking for a site that has and trying to determine if it has a feed, if they don't, I'm laughing because I'm thinking of early web when, it literally, everyone had like the actual RSS icon to let you know. And I don't think we kind of dropped that as a convention, which is kind of interesting. But there is a dedicated meta tag to alert that there's an RSS feed, and we could, you could go through the exercise of making our app sophisticated enough that like we'd give it just our base domain and it would parse that out. But we're going to keep it a little more simple, and we're going to just go ahead and supply it the full feed location. So we'll just start with this one. And we don't have any options. I'm going to move that out and let's see what it's got here. It's just kind of a generic starting point. I think this will echo out. Let's see if it does echo out without us changing anything when we run the feed here. Of course not. Okay, I do need to install node fetch. Okay, we'll pop back and do that. Ooh, all right. Well, it worked. Here we go. We've got our got the feed items coming in. So awesome. So right here, like this is part of what's like I love about Eleventy is, that was a couple minutes. We found a node package that kind of did our work for us, right? We didn't have to write anything unique. We didn't have to mess with like this complicated configuration process to add this as a source. There's no plugins involved. We're just directly using the package and using these kind of default features that Eleventy offers to create this as a data source. Now, of course, again, right now we're just we just let it kind of do its thing and output it in its original form in our console. So instead, we would like to return that out so that we can pick that up as data. But this allows us, of course, to kind of give kind of see what it is returning. So we're getting a title back, a description, and notably this description has HTML in it. So we mentioned on our feature list that we'll have to be prepared to handle that incoming HTML. And we hope it is, okay to, we'll have to see. I wonder if this plugin does any, or excuse me, this package, I wonder if it does any sanitizing. I'm not sure. We might just have to find that out. Oh, I did get my other feed to load. Let me throw a different feed at it, which is going to have a little more information in it. I'm going to give it my author feed from CSS Tricks. And let's see how it differs, if we get any sort of different information here. Yeah, we definitely got a lot more information. Particularly, it has way more, like it's giving the full article content. Whereas my Eleventy Rocks feed that we just looked at, it kind of varies because I have different, like my resources one, that's not an article, so that's why it's so short. I'm not purposely like only giving a summary, that's all that it is. But when you get down to my actual articles, then you get more content. So it's just a matter of it being different content types that are both feeding into the same source. Whereas for the CSS Tricks one, it is all articles, so we're getting a lot of content in here. So interesting. It looks like we're getting quite a few more kind of meta properties being populated here. So cool. So we talked about earlier in our feature list that we kind of made the assumption that some of the time there would be an excerpt and some of the time there would be a full article. We might not always have both. And I believe it was Killian, I don't know if they're in the chat today, but made the suggestion that we could, if we only get return an excerpt, you could add an additional parser that goes out, does kind of a DOM scraping type of a fetch to get the full article content. And that'd be tricky, but you could do it, especially since, again, this is kind of your own personal application. So we're configuring it ourselves, which means if you have a particular feed that is happening for, you could create that parser because you're fully in control. You can go out and you won't have to like try to be clever about getting that article content. You could go out and manually find out like what to find in the DOM to return that. Or maybe somebody in the chat has a more clever way. Maybe there's another package that already does this functionality. So I keep mentioning that because on the project that I did for my own personal use, I wanted to fetch one RSS feed. I initially started to be like, researching how do I do node fetch and like parse it out. And then it took me a little while to remember, I don't have to. I just grab a package that does this for me. So let's move on to where I wanted to get to, which is, we'll go ahead and leave this more full featured one in here. Let's just look at what the package tells us is available and operate off of that. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've got this in our data directory and we want to set it up so that it returns only the information that we actually want to use for our application. I have past experience with Gatsby, and one of the things, because when I came into Gatsby, I didn't know Node. I was still somewhat of a newbie to JavaScript, and I was definitely a newbie to React. I had used jQuery for a significant amount of time. So I was kind of learning all these things alongside Gatsby. And, Gatsby, I was like razzle-dazzled by like GraphQL and things like that. But using data in Eleventy and being able to fetch from a source and return only what you want, I don't know. To me, it's equivalent behavior. But I'm not building something very complex here. So there's use cases where GraphQL, I'm sure, is more ideal for your circumstance. But for what we're doing, this process is pretty great. We'll clean this up later. But for now, what we want to do is return, we want to kind of parse through this item and change it so we're only getting the little bits that we would like. So we know that that's already a object. So I don't know, is map my best choice here? This is where I get a little, or actually, you know what, let's keep it really simple on ourselves and we'll just change it instead of console logging it. For now, we will just return our item instead. We're not going to get the console, of course, but let's validate that what I have in mind here works. We might actually have to still transform it. But okay, over in our index file, I changed it back to NJK, to nungex, because I want to use a for loop to get that data. And I just want to validate that I'm on the right track of thinking that this is what we need to do to receive access here. So I'm going to say for item in. And so now this is where the name of that file is important. We're actually going to use this file name. That's all we theoretically need to access what's inside of there, what's being returned out of there. Make sure we end our for loop. So this syntax is relative to nungex. I think it's similar to Liquid, which is also a different templating language that you can also use with Eleventy. When you find different articles out there, you'll probably be most likely to see either nungex or Liquid, and that's just because they have kind of a priority status in Eleventy. They play well with Markdown. I just want to verify, are we getting anything here? Not quite. So we probably have to reformat that a little bit. And since I'm kind of at the end of time, so I probably will just have to double check what this looks like. It was kind of hard to read in the console. I probably need to do a little work on this to make sure it's kind of a unified array coming out. I'm guessing that's why this isn't 100% working here. So I'll do that one little intermediate step, and then we can explain it on the next stream, what happened. So what we kind of accomplished looking at today, we still definitely accomplished something. We were able to kind of verify that this is, a good route to go. It's definitely able to get that feed, seem to return things ultimately in a kind of readable way that we can be able to pick that up and get started with it. What we'll also look at on our next stream is, of course, this isn't quite going to work in terms of we're going to want it to pick up several different feeds. So first we'll kind of work through how do we want to supply that information to this script in a manageable way that, again, we're not building a UI to add the feeds that we want to use. We're just going to configure that. We'll also kind of look at how to actually start displaying that information as well. So once we are able to accept multiple feeds, then we'll start actually building out our templates to accept that information. And what we previously defined is that, we'll definitely do a home screen. We'll kind of decide, do we want to show our sources or the latest? And then work through the different page templates. And we'll see how Eleventy, thanks to this being a data source, will make that super easy to make dynamic pages. And that'll be fun to work through. Yeah, I hope you still were able to get, a few useful things, to know about Eleventy. Like I mentioned, this is a more complex thing you wouldn't normally do, or not, you wouldn't have to do for a base Eleventy setup. You wouldn't even need any data source at all. You could just create pages. It uses file system page creation. So if we added like an about page here, it would immediately be available. So if your goal is to create, a static site with no additional data sources, hopefully you at least learned kind of that part today. This method that we're doing here, yes, we're using, a dedicated package to help us fetch this, but you could fetch anything, and use this similar idea. So in other words, this would be the way you would begin to incorporate a headless CMS. So basically any source out there, you can grab it at build time, and then, as we will look at a little more in depth next week, however it makes sense for your data source, manipulate that, return it out, and we'll learn how you can create dynamic pages from that. So we're doing it from an RSS feed, but it would be similar to how you would do it reading from a headless CMS. So that's kind of why I picked this RSS project. It's, we get to look at a lot of those features that make Eleventy exciting and that push its boundaries just a little bit, and that you may not be finding in some of the current tutorial materials.